It was, yeah. Okay. Awesome. The light is so bright. So we're about ready to get started. If there's anybody needs to get some coffee yet, everybody awake? Kind of? Yeah. I'm not sure I'm awake. I don't think the writer to the Ecclesiastes knew about daylight savings time. There's a time for everything, but not daylight savings time. What a mom. Just bringing treats, taking care of those kids. I mean, this is a hard job, so you gotta eat to stay on top of it. Yeah. Let's begin with prayer. Lord Jesus, as we continue our discussions on the subject of correction today, help us to understand the challenges of being one who does correction, the challenges that arise for us, the things that are difficult for us to do, and yet we have to do them. So Lord, help us to find the way to do it, help us to find the strength that we need, and help us to remain true to that conviction that this is a most necessary work. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. So one thought that occurred to me since last week when we were talking about the cultivating to get rid of the weeds, it's a mechanical process. And when you think about it, if you go back 100 years, the farmers were working with horses, and farming was really much, much smaller. And if you go back beyond that, if you go back into Old Testament times and also Jesus' time, how did they do their cultivating at that point in time? Okay, you're making motions like with a hoe, Sue?
With manpower.
With manpower, right. So again, the fields were very small. So the seed would be planted by hand, and so the cultivating, the uprooting, most of that was also done by hand. So I think it probably would be helpful for us to be thinking in those kind of terms, that it was more of a hand kind of thing. Now, when you're doing it by hand, then I think the picture of the gardener would really come into play there. So if you kind of remember when your mother taught you how to weed, anybody have any memories of that? So what was she trying to teach you as you were weeding? Because everything is green.
How to differentiate what's a weed and what's not a weed.
Okay. That was a very important thing, to differentiate what's a weed and what's the plant that we really want to save here. And again, sometimes the weeds and the plants looked quite similar. So you had to have a discerning eye. So that was probably the most important thing, that your mother, taught you that. Because, the kid, I mean, first of all, you didn't want to be out there. And secondly, you just wanted to get it done, so you were just kind of ripping everything that you could get your hands on. So she's like, no, you got to be careful. Then the other challenge, the weed and the plant are side by side. So when you pull out the weed, what might happen? You might get the plant too, yeah. So, again, this requires a certain amount of delicacy, doesn't it? So I just want you to kind of keep that in mind, because as you and I think about the process of correction, this is again where the difficulties come in. This is delicate work. And I wanted to read you from John chapter 15. And this is where Jesus isn't talking about weeding, he's talking about pruning. But really it's the same thing. So when you're talking about grapevines or you're talking about fruit trees, again, the thing you have to do there is pruning. So in John 15, he says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. He cuts off every branch in me that bears no fruit, while every branch that does bear fruit he prunes, so that it will be even more fruitful. So that's kind of interesting to contemplate, isn't it? The pruning process. Have you ever driven by apple orchards in early spring, like right about now, February into March, and what do you see lying on the ground in those apple orchards? Branches, piles of branches. And how do those apple trees look when after all those branches have been cut off? They look kind of awful, And when I look at a tree, I like the tree that's got a lot of branches, a lot of leaves. I think, boy, that is really a beautiful tree. But if I'm an orchard person, or if I'm a grape grower, I'm not looking at a lot of leaves. Why not? Why do they prune out so much stuff? Sue?
In part, it's because the flowers need to have exposure to the pollinators. And if there's a lot of leaves in the way, the bees don't get in there like they should.
All right. One thing, you got to get the leaves out of the way so the flowers are more prominent, and so the bees and the pollinators can really home in and do their job. So that's a very important thing.
Bigger and better fruit.
Pardon?
And better fruit.
Bigger and better fruit, yeah. So what you're doing, instead of putting all the energy of the tree into the leaves and those extra branches, now all the energy is going into the fruit itself. So, very smart farming, isn't it? So again, see how important that is in the process of correction. What are we trying to do? We are trying to make this person fruitful, more fruitful. And so that involves pruning. That involves saying no. That involves stopping people from the road they're going down. And that is difficult, isn't it? And two other things. When you're trying to do that pruning and so on, maybe you've got a kid like this where if you show them disapproval, if you show them a correction, they just fall apart. They're a very sensitive person. They're very delicate. And so when you kind of come at them in a little stricter way, they just like, the idea that they had done something wrong, the idea that they needed to learn something, it just absolutely crushed them. There are a lot of sensitive people out there, aren't there? And I kind of count myself among that group. I talked to you last time about my dad teaching me how to cultivate and how he was yelling at me, and then how he went and looked over the field after I had finished and didn't like too much what he was seeing. And that crushed me because I was so sure that he was going to say, "Attaboy." And when I didn't get that, that just really cut me. That just really took me down. So, in this process of correction, again, we're all kind of thinking about that. Who am I dealing with? So here's another scripture I want you to think about. It's in Isaiah 42. And it talks about the servant who does not raise his voice. And he goes out there. And then it says the smoking wick he will not extinguish, and the bruised reed he will not break. So again, the imagery, you got a plant that has almost broken off. It's just kind of hanging by a thread. Normally, what would a gardener do with a plant that's broken off like that? Cut it off, yeah. You're like, well, that's a goner. Some of you that have house plants, you just, well, it was nice. I love that plant, but hey, got to go. Everybody's got to go sometime. But what this person does is not give up on that plant, hanging by a thread. So maybe he stakes it and ties it up to that stake so that it's not just flapping in the breeze. And then maybe he shades it from the sun a little bit, and then waters it and tends it, and every day he's kind of checking up on it. So do you see the tenderness? And again, that smoldering wick, there's no flame there, but the wick still is red, it's still glowing. Have any of you tried to revive a candle that is just glowing? How do you get that baby to burn again?
Extend the wick.
Okay, you extend the wick.
Very gently blow on it.
Gently blow on it. Okay, so you got to have some air there, don't you? You got to have some movement. But if you blow too hard, yeah, okay, it's gone now. No reviving this one. So have you ever realized how hard it is to blow gently? You got to have a little wind there, but not too much. And so again, it's a very delicate process. So I just want you to keep that in mind today as you go about the work of correction. You as a parent, you as a friend, you as a spouse, you as a child who have to talk to your parents. And now you're starting to think of scenarios, aren't you? So I just want to talk about that parent-child one. So that may be a time when mom and dad really should not be living independently any longer. Things are happening there. Mom is leaving the stove on, and dad is kind of letting some bills pile up, and they're not getting paid, and just some things are happening. Have any of you had that conversation? Mom and dad, it's really kind of time to think about assisted living or nursing home. How do those conversations go? How do most parents react to their children trying to correct them? I tell you from my own experience, it's like, you know who you're talking to. I'm your father. How dare you talk to me that way? There's kind of that immediate resistance, that pushback. that idea like, hey, I'm the one who tells you what to do. And now there's a role reversal that has taken place. And that is, again, it just kind of blows you out of the water, doesn't it? So those of you who have been down that road, I remember back in Marquezan, we had neighbors across the street, elderly couple. They loved to watch our kids playing in the street every day. And then Pa died, Mom's alone, and she's just going downhill. So she's got 3 boys and a daughter, and they're talking among themselves, we got to do something. And the boys said, well, we can't do that. So then it fell on the daughter. And I still see that pattern that so often today it's the daughters that are having to do those difficult things, and the boys are kind of sitting there saying, yeah, that's way too difficult for me. So the daughter is talking to her mother and saying that they have to do something. And the mother is like, no, can't hear that, don't want to do that. And so ultimately, what the daughter did, she made arrangements with the nursing home that they would accept her. And then she said to her mother, we have to go visit your friend who's a resident there. And so she goes. And then they said, oh, hi, Lil, we've got your room ready for you. And so they kind of tricked her into entering the nursing home. That didn't go real well. She was really angry. And this went on for some time. And then eventually she was like, all right, this has to be. But again, my heart went out to the daughter because, she was doing everything that she could think of. She didn't really like having to do what she had to do. So sometimes it's just messy. Sometimes it just doesn't go quite the way that you want to, but you do what you have to do. So I want to talk about some scenarios today in terms of correction. And I just want to put these out and then have you kind of, look at them and see what you think about them, see what you think was happening there. First one I want to talk about is part of my jail ministry down at Milwaukee County Jail. So I will go down there every Friday morning and I'd have a little Bible study. And I'd have maybe 10 guys that would come. We had a little room on the upper level of the pod where we could meet. So we'd have these discussions about the story. And I had this guy, Ray, in my class. He was a middle-aged gentleman. And again, most of the guys that you see in the jail are probably the younger ones. So when you see these older guys who are like 40s and 50s, you're thinking to yourself, how come they're in jail? How many times have they been in and out? So you might be looking at some repeat offenders there. But Ray was a real student of the Bible. He really knew his scriptures, and so he was always raising his hand. He was always answering the questions. He would go on in kind of elaborate discourses as he was talking about his knowledge of the scripture. And the other guys, they got kind of upset with him after a while. They were just like, Ray, you're dominating the conversation. You're taking all the air out of the room. You're not letting us ask any questions. And I could see that there was some real resentment there with the other guys. And I was wondering in my mind, what's the deal with Ray? Why is he always talking? Why is he always answering all the questions? Why is he putting himself out there as this expert? And I just kind of had that in the back of my mind. What's going on here? And then one day after class, he stuck around, and the other guys left, and he starts talking. He's talking about his case. So he had gone to a drug dealer, and the drug dealer had this big wad of cash lying there on the bed. And so Ray not only took the drugs, but he also grabbed the cash and ran for the hills. And so eventually, of course, they arrested him for theft. But he is going on about this drug dealer, like, hey, nothing happened to him, you know, and he didn't even get arrested, and, you know, this is just not right. And you know, he's going on and on about this drug dealer and how angry he is that he is in jail and this guy is still out there walking free. And as he got done talking about that, I said, well, Ray, what about the drugs? Why were you buying drugs? And he just, his shoulders slumped and his head went down. And he said, yeah. You know, he said, I was a youth counselor. I was working with youth and trying to help them get their lives turned around. And here I am. I'm on drugs myself. I'm messed up. And, you know, so now he crumbles. So again, we're talking about correction here, aren't we? And so again, I want you to think about, you know, how do you find a way to get in there? How do you get people to stop and take a look at themselves? And so in this case, I was trying to cut through that front that he had. You're going to see this with a lot of people, aren't you? That they have this front where everything is all right, and, you know, nothing going on here and all that kind of stuff. And the more that people are projecting that, the more you have to think to yourself, what's behind that? Now, Ray did not really like himself, did he? When he looked at himself and what he wanted to be and what he was actually doing, he did not like himself. So this was a hard thing for him, wasn't it? So how did the smoking wick and the bruised reed, how did that fit into this story? Did you see that working there? Okay, what did I do that kind of carried that out?
Instead of like reprimanding, you asked a question that led him to see.
Okay, so I think that was probably the important thing there was instead of saying, Ray, you piece of garbage, wrecking other people's lives as well as your own, I asked him a question. So again, as you're dealing with people, you may find that what asking a question does is make that person look in. Kind of, you know, take stock of what is happening there. Any other thoughts or questions that came to you as you looked at that scenario? The other thing I wanted to say to you is that Ray has a lot of brothers. There are many, many people in that penal system who, again, got that front. You know, and if you watch the guys when they're out there in the pod and they're interacting with each other, they all are, you know, displaying that front. But what are they doing in their cells in the middle of the night when their mind is going? You know, that may be where they're crying. That may be where they're saying, what am I going to do? How do I change this? So I just want to say that ministry to people in that situation is very important. And it takes a lot of people to do those one-on-ones. So again, as you look at cultivation and correction as an individual process rather than a mechanical, I'm just going to use my machine and I'm going to get 500 folks at once, it's really more of a one-on-one. Now, some of you may know people who are in prison. You might have relatives. You might have people that you are friends with who have people who are in prison. So, I think there's a lot of work that can be done there. And if you can't get into the prison system itself, because again, sometimes that's delicate to get the screening and the approval, a lot of these folks are coming out. And now, where do they fit in? Where do they get accepted? Who's going to help them to acclimate? And I think one of the biggest problems is that you're in this environment where you're told what to do, and now you get out and you have to take a hold. And many people find that very, very difficult to make that transition. Anything else on that story? All right, here's another story. Old farmer from up around New London area, very rural up there, a little church out there in Freedom, I believe it's called. So this is where this gentleman was farming. Comes to Fredert for cancer treatment. And as often happens when you're visiting with cancer patients and they're talking about themselves, they're not just talking about their cancer, but they're talking about their life. And you've heard the term life review. And so many people who are facing their mortality do a lot of life review. So they talk about things that happened in their life and things that they really were really proud of. And then there are the things that, again, were tragic. And so this gentleman was talking about tragedy. He said, I had a son, and he was in his teenage years and, growing up, helping on the farm, and Dad loved this son. He was a bright boy. And he said this, one of the things he loved about this son was his curiosity. He was kind of a scientist, he wondered what makes things work. And so he was experimenting and he was trying things. And so one of the things that he was intrigued about was gunpowder. And so this son is messing around, experimenting with gunpowder. And unfortunately, it blew up and killed him. And at the funeral, this man's father-in-law came up to him and he said, you killed that boy. And as he's telling me this, the mucus is running from his nose and he is sobbing. And he's in his 60s. And that boy probably died 30 years previous to that. So you can see how he has been carrying that all those years. You're a bad dad. You killed your son. And he's living with that guilt. And why is he telling me?
I think he wants assistance. So that he could get rid of some of the guilt.
Yeah, I think he wants some assistance with that guilt, yeah. When you carry that kind of guilt, that is heavy, heavy stuff, isn't it? So I think, again, as he's telling that story, he doesn't even know why he's telling that story. I really believe that the stuff that comes out of people They didn't even think they were going to talk about that. They didn't even know. But as you get to talking, somehow one thought leads to another thought, and then boom, there it is. But this is a big burden, isn't it? This is a big burden. So, okay, as we're looking at the process of correction. Now here we've got again a smoldering wick. The fire is almost out here, isn't it? He doesn't think that he can be forgiven. He doesn't know if God could possibly do that for him. And his father-in-law, that word just sticks in his head, doesn't it? So who needs correction here? Does he need correction?
If you could determine the facts and circumstances surrounding it, somebody accusing you of something doesn't necessarily mean that you did something.
All right. So you can go down that road then. You know, this is a very important thing for a lot of folks. Who's at fault, right? So when you hear about an accident, a lot of times people will say, was he drunk? Well, okay, if he was drunk, well then we know who to blame. So that, I think, is something that's always there, is who do we blame? Okay, well, if we want to, start spreading the blame around, we could blame the father for not being more observant, for, knowing, and he kind of said, I knew that this was a risky thing, and yet he thought, well, my boy is bright enough not to do something stupid. So you see, here we get into that parental judgment thing. Parents are always second guessing themselves. Was I too hard? Was I too soft? Did I say too much? Did I say too little? This really can drive you crazy, can it? So when you get into that blame, there's lots of blame to spread around. But the thing about Grandpa, that really gets me is that he felt that he had to blame someone because he loved his grandson and his heart was broken and he was angry and somebody had to take responsibility for this. So he was focused on that blame. So I want you to think about that, of how often in our anger and in our need to say and do something, then we're not speaking out of love, are we? So Grandpa was not coming from the standpoint of, I love my grandson and I love my son-in-law. He was coming from that vantage point. So I want you to think about that, of how often when we get into tough situations, where are we coming from? What is going on in our own heart? So I guess in my mind at that point, I really thought, okay, there's been enough blame here, and there's been plenty of guilt here. So, we already got that part covered. But what he hasn't heard is that he's a human being, and so as a parent, you make mistakes, and he maybe made some mistakes, but did he love his son? Oh, he loved his son. And so I think to just raise that up for him, that God knows what kind of a parent you were trying to be. And this is an awful, awful thing. But God has not stopped loving you. And God loves you now in your broken heart. And I wanted him to know that. So I think correction kind of, goes down all kinds of angles, doesn't it? And when you and I are in the middle of those things, we're not quite sure what we want to say, not quite sure how we want to go with that, but I always want to err on the side of love. And his tears and his broken heart and all that he brought out that day, it just made me feel that we had to go there. We had to go to that love. We had to bind up that broken heart there. Any other thoughts that you've got on that situation? Go ahead, Sue.
Sometimes it's easier for people to blame another person than it is to blame God when something bad happens. Sometimes getting at the heart of that is like, well, how are you feeling about God right now? Rather than, am I blaming myself or is somebody blaming me?
All right. So there's another whole discussion, isn't it? Is that, again, we don't even want to say, why did God allow this? And I think in those tragedies, where people have a narrow escape and they come out of it, what do they say? They say, well, God spared me. God sent his angels. And that really sounds good, but then you have to look at the other side of that. What about the guy that didn't make it? Then does that mean that God didn't send an angel? Did that mean that in that case God said, nah, I'm going to let this happen? So, again, that's where people just don't know what to do with that. Where is God in all of this? And that's a very difficult thing. Look at Job also, where the more that he thought about it, the more confused he got. Because his friends are saying, well, Job, this happened because you did something. And Job said, well, okay, what? And they don't know, but they're pretty sure it was something. And so they want Job to go in the closet and really dig into himself and find that skeleton that's lurking there. And they just won't let it rest. If you read the book, this goes on for 30 plus chapters where the friends are just pounding on Job. What does Job finally say to them? I don't need friends like you. I'm exhausted. I'm tired. You just won't let up. You just keep at it. And so, guys, I'm sorry, but time out. You guys got to go back home. Thanks for coming. But yeah, I can't do this. All right, then it's just Job and God. And so again, he's saying, all I need is an audience. I just need you to talk to me. I just need some kind of answer. And then what happens? God speaks, yeah. Yeah, God does finally come. He says, all right, Job, I hear you've been asking about me. But what I find really intriguing about that, it starts out where it says, God spoke out of the whirlwind. Well, what does that sound like? Why doesn't God appear in a visible form? Why does he speak from this kind of if you can imagine like a tornado? So there's all kinds of energy and power and force there, but you can't see a face. Why does God come in that form?
Because he does that almost every appearance he makes in the Old Testament. The only exception being that I recall when he appeared to Abraham.
All right. So in Abraham, he came in the form of an angel, of a man, but most of the time he did not come in visible form. So again, yeah.
It emphasizes that God is mysterious and he can't be fully understood.
All right. God is mysterious. And there was another hand, yeah.
I almost wonder if it's not more that he wants you to listen to what he has to say rather than focus on what he looks like.
Okay.
Or your like, how you would respond to seeing him in person.
It doesn't matter what I look like, but you better hear what I got to say. All right?
Well, he comes to us as the ruler of the natural world, the universe. And, something as powerful as a storm or a whirlwind, if you think also Elijah in the cave, and the big wind and stuff. He's showing that, hey, I am the ruler of this world, and that's kind of the conversation that he has with Job. It's like, you don't have the perspective to be judging me.
Yeah. So I think, again, we're talking about the mysterious part here. God is ultimately unknowable because he is beyond human comprehension. And I don't know about you, but the more that I hear about the Jim Webb telescope and what they're seeing out there in space, the more that we are discovering, the bigger this universe gets and the bigger God gets. I'm like, whoa, okay. So, I'm in my head, and I know a lot of stuff, and I can figure out a lot of stuff, but still, this brain is kind of small. And so when I am talking to this ultimate being, mysterious, beyond knowing, wow, this is really kind of overwhelming. So I do think that all those things that you have talked about are really at play here, aren't they? That, God is saying, all right, if you want to have the conversation, I'm perfectly willing to sit down and talk with you, but just understand, who I am. And so there's going to be a little disconnect here, because I'm going to try to explain things to you that you're not going to be able to comprehend. So just so we know that. So this is right up front. And then he goes on with all these questions. So he starts out by saying, all right, Job, he says, so you want to debate, but, where were you when I planned this universe? When I drew up the blueprints? And Job was like, wow, I don't think I can do blueprints. No, I wouldn't have any idea how to plan a universe. All right, God says, well, let's move on from that. So how about, bringing it into existence then? Were you there? No, I couldn't do that either. I couldn't do that, the stars thing and the fusion and, all those kinds of things that I couldn't do that either. Oh, okay. Well, maybe how about maintaining that? Keeping the whole thing running, keeping everything going. And Job is, no, I can't help with that either. So it really was very humbling. Now, Job's question was, why did this happen to me? And now God's got him going with all of this stuff. And Job starts to come to some realizations here. What does he come to realize? He thought his problem was important, didn't he? And it was. But it also was just kind of one thing in the larger scheme of things. So here's something to bust your mind over. You've got your life and you've got your problems and your struggles. And then there are 8 billion other people in the world who are also going through that. And then this is just the earth. And then who knows what's going on out beyond that. So what it does to us is to say, okay, this is complicated. I sure don't get what's happening to me. I'm really hurting right now. This is crushing. I don't know if I can recover. But I see that this is only part of all of this other stuff that's going on. And that's what God wants him to see. What he wants him to see is, I haven't forgotten about you. I see you. I know how hard it is. And I'm with you. So then you see Job saying, I've heard about you with my ear, but now I see you with my eye. What does that say to you?
Struggling with faith,
Struggling with?
his faith.
Yeah. Yep. And again, what Job is saying is, I feel so much better. Nothing has changed. My life is still miserable, but I see you. And so I picture that as, I heard about you. He's kind of over here, and God is over there. Yeah, I've heard about you. But now I see you. He's sitting in God's lap. And he's looking up into God's face. And he sees God smiling and looking down at him, like a parent holding their child. And that just blows my mind. Because nothing has changed except Job. So Job is no longer angry. He is no longer busting his head trying to figure out something that can't be understood. He's just saying, Daddy, it's okay. You're here. It's okay. And that's just unbelievable. So when I'm with people who are in Job's shoes, and their hearts are broken, and they just don't know what they're going to do, that's where you kind of you want them to see with the eye. And as God's representative, when you are there with that person, maybe you want to take their hand. Maybe you want to look them right in the eye. Maybe you want to cry with them. Maybe you want to hug them. And then Job's words become their words. I see you. They see God through the gospel that we are living with them. So that old farmer, he needed that, didn't he? He needed that chaplain that day. And that's the thing I always wonder in the morning when I get my sheets and I go on the floors, who am I going to meet today? A lot of people, they say, no, I'm good. And I maybe go down 10 doors and everybody's good. And then I meet the old farmer in bed 11. So that might be true in your life too. That you, again, put out a lot of energy toward people. You reach out to people. You're friendly to people. Nothing happens. And then you meet that one. So I just want you to kind of keep your eyes open. Because you don't know. You don't know where that's going to be. The other day I met this lady in the chapel. And I think I maybe mentioned that, didn't I? And then that became a long conversation. So, you just don't know when that's going to happen. Any other thoughts on that story there? Of what does it mean to correct? So how many, go ahead.
Just when you shared how there's 8 billion people and God, he's managing everything, it is incredible that between his gospel message and the ways he carries out his promises in your life, like providing for your daily needs or hearing your prayers, how personal he feels. I'm sure probably all of us could share our own experiences with that, but it's, yeah, for such a big God to be so personal, it's pretty incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, for a big God to be personal. Well, that kind of gets you back to the incarnation, doesn't it? Yeah, so God became a man. And again, he interacted with individuals. So, if you look at the church of Jesus' day, again, they were kind of like we are, where they had congregations, they had groups, and so they were doing the group stuff. But really, Jesus was doing a lot of individual. He was going around from village to village, and he was specifically focusing on the people that he met there. So, all right, okay, he happened to be a leper outside this one, so he takes some time to interact with him, and the law said they're unclean, but Jesus went there, and he touched him, and he healed him. And the woman at the well, just this one person, and he's there, and he says, well, I really do group stuff. No. He says, okay, let's focus in on who you are and what's going on with you. So, as you say, Adam, it's kind of mind-blowing that a God who's so big can also be so individual, can also be so personal. And another scripture that comes to my mind as I think about that is, it's in Ephesians, I think, where he talks about Christ is the head of the church, and we are the body. So see, that's where you and I come in. So actually, we're all parts of Christ. And so each of us as individual body parts, we're in a specific location, we have our functions and our callings, and then we also have those people that we interact with around us. Mary.
5 minutes ago is that God is changeless. His love continues, and as we plant and cultivate and so forth and uproot, if we can just love more like Jesus.
If we could just love more, yeah. So I think, again, that's why I talked about the pruning. I am the vine and you are the branches. And he's saying, I have to do this because I love you so much. And I think, especially in my childhood, I understood correction as punishment. I was bad. And I knew my dad loved me, but not right now. And so again, it's really hard, I think, to see correction as an act of love. And so you get into the church with church discipline. And so you go and you talk to someone who has lost their way. And it's hard for them. They think that you're punishing. They think they are the bad member. And I kind of look back at my pastoral ministry. I think, I would probably redo some of the things that I did there as I was trying to work with the people that had become inactive. And we were coming at it more from the standpoint, hey, you better get going here or you're out. And that didn't show a lot of love. So I'm sorry about what I did with a lot of that. Chaplaincy kind of got me going in a different direction. So any other thoughts or comments that you have about that? Yeah.
In the area we're talking about, we need to have the ability to discern who can be helped, because there are people out there that are beyond help.
Okay.
And how to be able to discern the one from the other and concentrate your efforts on those that can be helped.
Yeah. Well, again, I think in the hospital too, where they say I'm good, okay, I'm not gonna say, you know, you really need to talk to the chaplain. Because, again, they're not ready. So when we say they are beyond help, we also want to say at this time. So right now, they're not listening. Right now, they are kind of focused in a different direction. So right now, I'm probably not going to make any inroads here. But I'm going to leave that person with the impression I'm not upset. So when I go in the room and they say, I'm all good here, I could say, fine, and slam the door. But I say, okay, yeah, that's all right. I hope everything goes well for you today. So I leave them with that little crumb there. That if the time ever comes where you think you might want to talk to somebody. So I have seen that where that person who said no later on becomes a person who says yes. Ken Lenz, some of you may remember, was another person on institutional ministries. So I worked under him when I first came. He was about 11 years older than me. But he had a story where he came and he told the patient that he was a chaplain. And the first thing the patient said, don't talk to me about Jesus. And Ken is like, all right. And so they just had a little conversation and kind of Ken went on his way. But they had that little conversation. And the guy wanted Ken to pray for him that he would get a cure for his cancer. So Ken prayed for that. And then a couple of months later, he's back. The cancer has spread. He knows he's going to die. And Ken comes in the room and he says, tell me about Jesus. Isn't that incredible? So I want you to always think about that. When people shut the door, you just say to yourself, not now. But it doesn't mean the conversation is over. It doesn't mean the opportunities are gone. Hang around. But then go on and put your efforts into people who want to talk. So that's kind of how my ministry goes. And I think that's probably how it goes in your life too. Now, I think sometimes for us, where that really becomes difficult is where it's a family member. And we're not making any headway. And we just can't get through. And we keep on pounding it. And the family member keeps on resisting it. And, you know, we're both spinning our wheels. So that happened to me probably 30 years ago with my youngest son. And, you know, we couldn't get through. And I'm down at the jail, and we're talking about the story of the prodigal son. And everybody in the class is saying, oh yeah, that's me, I'm the son, I broke my mama's heart. And I said, as we got done with the story, I said, you know, I'm living this story myself right now. My son is out there, and I can't reach him. And it just got so quiet. And they're kind of like, oh, this guy with the shirt and the tie, he's got problems too. He's a father, and he's got a broken heart. And it was just quiet. And then one guy said, well, maybe you're not the one who's going to reach your son. Boom. That just hit me like, whoa. But he was right, wasn't he? I was spinning my wheels, and he's saying, you know, just kind of back off. Just let that go for now. Let's see if somebody else out there. And you know what? Somebody else was out there. It was my brother. And my son was talking to my brother. And I know that that was a huge thing. And then another guy said, don't stop coming here. Because I was about ready to give up being a chaplain. I thought, hey, if I can't even father my kid, maybe I shouldn't be doing this either. So, you know, it's so important to kind of keep our bearings of doing what we can, letting go of what we can't do, allowing time and space. But that business of correction, it is really hard, isn't it? I understand that, and you understand that. But we worked hard here today. And I think lots and lots of things are going on in your mind and in my mind. And there's more we can talk about, but we got to quit on correction. And next week we will start with mourning. See you next week.